Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to today's webcast. My name is Daniel Bulger, and I'm the Director of Partnerships with the ARF, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we begin learning about millennial purchase behavior, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. For the best webcast experience, please keep yourself muted and your computer web camera turned off. Unfortunately, if you do turn on your camera or unmute yourself, I will have to disconnect your access. The audio will be streamed. This means you will be able to hear us throughout your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use the teleconference option, I will post the information in the chat box. Should you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please send these to me using the chat box and I will relay them back to the presenter after the session is completed. Today's session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, it will be available on demand within the next 2 weeks. Here's just a quick snapshot of our upcoming events. If you would like any information on any of these events, feel free to send a message to me in the chat box, and I'll be happy to help you out. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Paul Street, who is a Director of Global Research and Analytics with RealityMine. With RealityMine, Paul provides media expertise to data analysis, assisting their clients around the world with their national touchpoint studies. Paul has enjoyed over 25 years in the media industry, which stays at an advertising agency, media marketing association, and recently leading a multimedia sales research. He has published papers with both the ARF and SMR on single source research for product placement and survey design. Thank you for your time today, Paul. I'll pass things over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Daniel. Just waiting for my screen to come up.
I think you're good to go, Paul. I see it on my end.
Okay, wonderful. What I've got for you is a number of slides just talking about how millennials go about their daily lives and giving some context as to how and when they make their purchases. Millennials, in this case we're defining them as 18 to 34-year-olds, are disrupting media, disrupting commerce, yet they're always thinking of buying something. What you see on this chart is the average day, Monday through Sunday, with the 18 to 34-year-olds in the teal significantly ahead of their older cohorts of 35 to 54-year-olds and the 55 to 64-year-olds. And what it suggests is approximately 15% of this population is actually thinking about a specific product purchase that's upcoming in their lives. So about 1 in 7 of these people are always thinking about something to purchase. TouchPoints asks a whole slew of categories as for purchase intent and purchase activity, whether it's events and attractions, in which you can see 28% of millennials will report it through TouchPoints that they're considering events or attractions, whether it's movie or theater events, fashion and apparel, travel and vacation. But their activity extends a lot further than those categories that you might assume they'd be leading in. Health and beauty, even healthcare and pharmaceuticals, they're slightly ahead of their next older cohort. And when you get down to house and garden, you still have almost a third of millennials giving consideration to purchases in that category. So, what is our agenda today? Giving you a bit of a tease as to what TouchPoints can do for purchase consideration, but I'd like to review what TouchPoints is in the US, the UK, and around the world. Some media measures in TouchPoints, just a bit of a taste. I don't want to drag out what could be a huge presentation. Mood and attentiveness measures that we have of context for people's daily lives. Emotions, life, consideration, and purchase activity. Then I'll walk you through a path to purchase narrative for millennials. So, what the heck is TouchPoints? Well, it launched in 2004 in the United Kingdom. We've relaunched it in America in 2013. But really, the product is designed and launched to give a consumer-centric research approach to the media landscape, Even in 2004, the number of media choices available to consumers was thought to be too great to measure conventionally or to plan conventionally. Consumers have more control now than ever, and there was a need for a broad multimedia platform to integrate all kinds of proprietary research at agencies. And there really was a media neutral approach being required. So what TouchPoints does is answer some fundamental questions about media. When, where, and how is media consumed? What are people doing when they consume media, whether that's other media or life activities? Who are people with while consuming media? And then how do they feel, and whether that's in mood, attentiveness, or specific emotions? And then what we're talking about today is context of the media impressions leading into purchase activity. In 2004 in the UK, it started as a consumer-centric multimedia planning tool, and it's now evolved, really adding the whole cross-media, cross-device strategic planning and channel evaluation tool. What the ultimate goal that we have for TouchPoints in America, as well as Canada and around the world, is to become the channel planner as it is in the UK, in which a hub study is created, in which TouchPoints resides, and then there's fusion linkages with all of the industry gold standards for measurement, and whether that's television, radio, out of home, online measurements, all are fused to the hub, as well as proprietary databases for individual advertisers or their agencies. What we have presently in TouchPoints is a planning process in which there's no point in the planning process at an agency in which TouchPoints can't play a part, whether that's at the beginning with a briefing or a task, going through ideas, planning, and then ultimately measurement and evaluation can be tracked through the fusion with the gold standard measurement tools for the currencies. TouchPoints gives context to the media day. And what's so much fun with the studies around the world is you can build wonderful stories of how people go through their daily routine, interact with the world, and interact with media. And here you see a beautiful graphic from the IPA folks in the United Kingdom who initiated the TouchPoint studies. Well, what do our subscribers say about TouchPoints? Well, it's the total reach and frequency that's powerful and unique in the United Kingdom. It's real consumers' daily lives. This is what it's all about. And one of our North American clients say, it's incredibly interesting. Let us summarize. As for the global reach of TouchPoints, the nations in black are current markets where TouchPoints exists. The green nations are where TouchPoints is in negotiations. And of course, the technology is available anywhere that's interested. There are now over 100 subscribers to TouchPoints around the world. Here's a sampling of a lot of them. Of course, there's agencies in multiple markets who subscribe, so that makes up the 100 subscriptions. So, as for methodology, how the heck do we do this? Well, for the study that I'm reviewing, everyone was recruited online, age 18 to 64, and had a smartphone, their own smartphone. They are qualified online with regards to age, sex, and geographic quota, which in America is by region. They had either an iOS or an Android device. And ultimately, if they qualified to be part of the panel, they were sent a link to download the e-diary. The TouchPoints study is essentially 4 separate studies in America. The online recruitment, qualification, and demographic survey takes place on the computer, as I just walked through. An SMS is sent to a participant's smartphone where they download the diary app, as well as a passive meter, which measures what's going on their phones. I won't give a lot of detail with regards to passive, as Daniel requested that we keep the presentation under 7 hours. The first thing people complete on their smartphones with the survey is a tell us about yourself survey, which is really about big patterns of household activity and personal activities. But the crux of TouchPoints is the e-diary, which has a half-hour granularity for reporting, and they complete for 7 days on their smartphone. At the end of every day, participants are sent a late in the day survey, which gets into some of the very fine brand consideration, shopping activities. Great detail can be executed in the end of the day study. Ultimately, we have 5,000 completes that we do project onto a hub study of 18,000 cases from MRI, and there are partners with this. The methodology for the e-diary, ideally people complete every waking half hour, but they're only sent a note when they haven't completed a half hour for more than 2 hours of their day. A minimum of 3 sessions are required for a participant to have their data being in tab, so that way they're not completing the entire day at the end of the night. On average, though, people spend about 9 data entry sessions to complete a day of data. The diary perishes when an unreported half hour is more than 15 hours old. We don't want people reaching back too far to tell us what they are doing. This really allows a 6 p.m. half hour to be completed before noon the next day. And given some people's demanding social Friday nights, we accommodate their demanding physiological Saturday mornings. Participants complete 7 days with the e-diary, but it can be accomplished over a 13-day window if necessary. The legacy passimeter remains on the device, and it's evident for the phone user to know that TouchPoints is running in the background, and they can remove that at any point. So, some sample screens. For each half hour of the waking day, people are asked, where are you? And by simply touching the appropriate key, they might indicate that they are in transit. Well, what type of transport was being used? And if it's appropriate for the vehicle they're in, they're asked, were you driving? Who were you with? Which there's a whole host of permutations and combinations. What were you doing during that half hour? And then were you using any media? The device measurement is the first question. We don't ask whether they're seeing video. We ask, which device are you using? And then how are they using that device? And that can be looking at, well, how are you using the TV set? How are you listening to radio or other audio? What type of magazines were you reading? And you said that you were reading a printed newspaper. What type were you reading? Social media is asked with specific brands. And then for every half hour, what's asked of participants is whether they made a purchase in any of 24 categories. And then, of course, whether they were considering a purchase or had made any decisions about a purchase. And with a little bit of fun, we ultimately ask, how are you feeling in this half hour? Some media measures and touch points. Well, just for some definitions, millennials, or the 18 to 34-year-olds, we're calling 35 to 54-year-olds Generation X, and then the late boom of 55 to 64. So for a bit of a landscape, looking through TouchPoints as a single source, we can look at television, which has the appropriate boom and prime time, mobile use, which continues throughout the day, billboards, which you can see having surges for the morning and evening commute, radio with its morning rush, and then social media, which carries on through the day fairly consistently. We can compare and contrast amongst the cohorts, with the millennials being the least likely to be tuning in to television in prime time. We can look at social media activity through the day, with the late boomers being the least active. And then we can also look at things such as social media and television use concurrently, and a bit of an interesting development here in which we see the 55 to 64-year-olds being most likely in the late afternoon and evening to be active on the two media at the same time. Millennials' mood and attentiveness. What are their daily lives like? Near the end of every half hour, we ask people what is their mood and how alert they are. And these are on slider scales between 1 to 5. And for mood, it extends from a very bad mood at 1, a neutral reporting being 3, or they can scale it all the way up to 5 to report they're in a very good mood. Attentiveness goes from 1, which is very relaxed, all the way through 5, which is very alert. And here we can look at the waking hours of millennials. And really, they don't report themselves to be in a particularly bad mood through the day, or even somewhat bad. Overwhelmingly, they're good or very good, with a good cohort being in the neutral category. Now, this looks very stable, and for the entire population, it is. But individuals sway all the way through the scales from a half hour to half hour. So there really is quite a degree of mobility amongst the reporting. In regards to attentiveness, you can see alert and very alert. During the daytime takes up about 50% of the reporting. A neutral alertness, and then very relaxed, only really getting into a large proportion of respondents in the wee hours of the morning. We can look at these scales on a 5-point mean. And what's interesting to see for mood is that the millennials report themselves to be a little less in a good mood than their older peers. And for attentiveness, they report themselves to be a little lower attentiveness, perhaps a little bit more relaxed than their older peers on average. Trying to give more context to this, we can look at mood and consideration when they're actually thinking and reflecting upon potential brand purchases. What's fascinating is both the 35 to 54-year-old and the older group actually increase their mood. They transition to a better mood, while millennials actually decline. Their score, the mean score for millennials, drops when there's consideration. For purchase, it's even a little bit worse. And you can see the older group surging. They get in a far better mood when they're making the purchase. It's only when we're looking at online purchase do the millennials seem to actually perk up, actually going above their average day score for mood. With regards to attentiveness, reading down the clusters, for consideration, millennials seem to be far more relaxed when giving consideration to brand purchases. When they're actually making the purchases, there's relatively little difference. They're still below their average score for attentiveness. And they're even less attentive, less alert, as they might say, when they're making an online purchase. Whether that's a comfort zone for the purchase activity, it'd be conjecture, but it's just interesting how they differ from the older groups. Emotions, again, life, consideration, and some purchase activity. This mosaic is a reflection of the average week for millennials. And contented is the largest single emotion that's being reported. Happy, tired, indifferent, excited. Thirsty is the lowest reporting group, although lonely isn't very far behind. Across the average week, we can see how the pattern of excited tracks for millennials, and excited is one of the great categories for millennials. Whether they're confident, and their confidence seems to peak at about 3 o'clock. Hungry, well, this is a touchstone. It makes sense that noon and 6 o'clock are great times for people reporting themselves hungry. When they feel stressed, 4:30 seems to be a peak for the entire group being stressed. And then interested and exhausted, growing through the evening. Again, this seems to make sense. Different emotional lives. Comparing with the total sample population of 18 to 64, millennials seem to be less contented in general. They simply are less likely to report themselves contented, while the late boomers seem to be damn contented. Happy, being a closer group for the three cohorts. Millennials are more likely to report themselves tired. Confidence is not, on a relative basis, a long suit for the millennials. However, excited is. The 55 to 64s are far less likely to report themselves excited. And amused, absolutely. This is a millennial strength, though not necessarily one for the 55 to 64-year-olds. Now, emotions during consideration. This is indexed against the average performance for the cohorts. So we're not comparing to an average amongst 18 to 64-year-olds. And we can see continuation of confidence and excited being reported versus their daily lives. Now remember, we're still having millennials reporting themselves to be less confident than the other cohorts, but when they're giving some brand consideration, their emotions of confidence seems to actually spike. Amused, hopeful, and some common sense discoveries. They are far less likely to report themselves tired or indifferent while giving some brand product consideration. For context, we can look at the 35 to 54s and the 55 to 64s, sharing some of the pattern. When they're actually purchasing, online purchases, huge spike for excited, straight strength and hopeful, exhausted, interested. I'm not quite sure what they're purchasing online to create such a spike in loving, but we can see how this contrasts with all purchase activity, in which the vast majority is still in store, but you can see how excited pops on this, as well as confidence. Millennials in fast food, go through a brief narrative looking at how we can track through touch points a consumer journey. So what we're going to do specifically for this is identify individuals who made a fast food purchase on Friday and knowing that they're going to make the purchase, what is their activity and perhaps how they compare and contrast with other groups. We have in North America an interesting pattern of Friday being a day for higher fast food purchase, and I call it the Fat Friday performance, in which you can actually see people having consideration through the week and finally making their reward purchase on Fridays of fast food. So what does that look like? Well, Fridays for millennials, we can track as they go into their workplaces with the orange line. The interesting black dotted line is when they report themselves to be traveling, and there's travel throughout the day. Gray is the presence in a food place, whether that's fast food or a restaurant. Green is when they're having a meal, whether that home, office, we can identify by location, but they're simply eating. And the teal line is when they report themselves to be in a commercial location, so whether stores or malls or other places of commerce. And track on Friday their individual responses. When are they thinking of fast food on a Friday? Now, they may well have considered Thursday and earlier, but this is their activity on Friday. I introduced the fast food decided. They've actually resolved what they're going to do with regards to a fast food purchase, and that's the black. And ultimately, fast food purchases, the half hours that they're reporting themselves to be making the purchase, and we can see the spike at noon. What is really fun with touchpoints is that we can look at the average daily reach of millennials across all kinds of devices. This is device use. It's not specifically what they're doing on a device, but you can see the range of devices that are available, with mobile device being reported at 80% on a daily basis. We can also look at people who report themselves to be considering fast food and using the device. So we actually have about a third of the population who, while considering fast food, were actually using a mobile device. We can break that into proportion of device use by hours. On the left-hand column, you can see television use amongst millennials is about 28% of their device use amongst the devices I have listed here. Mobile makes up about 28% of the typical week. Now, in the same week, when they're considering fast food consumption, the percentages change. And you can see the surge in mobile use as well as radio use for concurrent activities. And really, this is the whole point of the diary. What are you doing? What are you thinking of? And how are you feeling about it? To break out that mobile use, now this is the e-diary. This is what people are reporting on a half-hour basis. Texting was the number one thing to be reported. Apps, email, websites, you can read probably better than I can. And photos and slideshows are a fraction of a percent. So all of this adds up to 100% of what people are doing with their mobile phones, according to their diaries. The passive meter reports slightly different, but that's a different story. So, how do fast food millennials who are purchasing on Friday differ from millennials in general? Well, turns out if you're going to have fast food, you're in a good mood. And we see people being in a good mood well above the average for the cohort. They're also more likely to be traveling than their non-fast food consuming peers. They're more likely to be with friends and coworkers, except some parts in the early evening and late evening. And they actually report themselves to be more likely to be alert or very alert. So interesting variances of the consumers versus the rest of the group. GfK's MRI data is a wonderful product that's fused into the use for touchpoints. And we can actually identify consumer groups. Starbucks, we can identify through MRI and then track what Starbucks customers are doing with regards to making fast food purchases on Fridays by half hour. How does that profile compare in their time of activity with McDonald's? Well, you can see. Whether it's important or not, Starbucks customers have a little bit of a spike at 1:30, McDonald's spike a little bit later at 2 o'clock. So, where does this leave us for the next steps for touchpoints? Well, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, the USA TouchPoints, a new study, will be published. The USA Hispanic TouchPoints is available in the marketplace, giving an identical profile of how Hispanic Americans are interacting with media and products. There's the passive data set from the smartphones that are coincidental with touchpoints. So it's the same week being reported in passive data that you've just been looking at, as well as there's a longitudinal product in which you can look at participants passively on the longer term. We're undergoing more evaluations for integrating passive data into geolocation information. And there's fusion discussions going on with other third-party data providers. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is have the expansion of touchpoints data being integrated into more media and buying and planning tools to get to the stage, perhaps, where they are in the UK, where it's become a crucial planning tool and a great resource for channel allocation. So without any other comments from me to go through, I'm be more than happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you, Paul. Just a reminder to all of our listeners, if you have any questions for Paul, you can send them through the chat box and I will relay them back to Paul. We currently have one question. Paul, toward the end of the presentation on the chart with Starbucks and McDonald's, is this when people are actually purchasing Starbucks and McDonald's?
No, and I guess that's that's the very careful thing we have to be with MRI data. We don't know when people are purchasing Starbucks, McDonald's, or any of the other hosts of brands that are identified. It's simply the profile. It's the individuals who report themselves to be light, medium, heavy users of those establishments, or any use of those establishments, and what their activity is when fused to the TouchPoints data. So we have the TouchPoints information as to when people are purchasing fast food. We're simply getting a subset of those that look like Starbucks or McDonald's customers.
Great. Can you share how you handle drop-offs or people who don't complete their diary? Do you replace that spot or over-recruit?
Yeah, what we've done is we've tried to keep only in tab of 7-day participants. Critical days being Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because they're so different from the rest of the week. We have had occasions in specific national panels in which we will introduce, with the National Panel Advisory Council's permission, to look at people that have completed 4 or more days and then create or at least model other days that are missing. So that typically gets a better and greater granularity for the completed touchpoints panel to get a better insight as to what's going on.
Next question. Are the MRI respondents matched to touchpoints respondents in this case?
Yeah, what happens with the MRI is we simply have the touchpoints participants being fused to the MRI cases. So an individual, we're looking at the MRI data when we're looking at Starbucks or McDonald's and simply having the appropriate touchpoints cases fused to that database.
Great. I currently have one more question, so if anybody else has something to add, please submit it to the chat box right now. Next question. Do you know if they more often made their decisions based on advertisements seen on television or digital platforms?
No, and that's where it becomes a bit of a challenge. We can identify down to a station level whether people are reporting activity in that half hour, but we're not sure whether if they see an ad for apparel, let's say, for the Gap, and then go make an apparel purchase, we don't know if they're still thinking of a distant purchase or an immediate purchase. So it's correlation that we can come up with, so we can calculate correlations, but nothing definitive as to a one-to-one relationship for that or online or in the other media.
Great. We have another one. What about content from friends on social media versus ads?
What's interesting with the study that I haven't gotten into is there's actually a question with regards to seeking or giving advice on brands that we ask every half hour. So we can actually get a measure of people interacting with others with regards to brands. And then we're asking, are you on social media or are you on by device driven? So we then have a great correlation of saying they're on social media and they're giving or receiving advice with regards to brand purchases.
What incentives do you offer the participants in order to attract them to the app?
Well, it's simply the glory of being a TouchPoints participant, plus $50. Yeah, it's interesting that the cash incentive is not the prime driver for participation. We have people who, in some research on research, are interested in media, are interested in what their own activities are, and the money certainly helps out. But we also have to be vigilant. We have people around the world who are very interested in getting themselves recruited or self-selecting. So we have all kinds of measures in place to make sure that we don't get a lot of people from around the world participating in a national panel.
Great. Right now, that's all we have for questions. So if anybody has anything else to add, I will be emailing out the recording of the session to everybody. So if you have any last minute questions, feel free to reply to me and I can put you in touch with Paul. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I want to thank Paul for his time, and we look forward to seeing you again at another webcast.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.